Yes, indeed. This is Professor David Steinberg of the SteinbergFiles.com talking to you today about another misleading report from the New York Times about Obamacare. What a surprise. Let me ask you this question to start. Let's say I make a deal with you. You pay me $1,000 and 9 months from now I'll give you $500 back. That's the deal. Sound like a good deal to you? Not so much? Well, let's see what the New York Times has to say about that kind of a deal. In its story, insurance rebates seen as selling point for health law. You have to realize, of course, that the New York Times doesn't do reporting. They do propaganda. They do re-elect Obama propaganda. That's what they do, and this is typical. Story begins. Lucia Harkin reader's check landed in her mailbox last week. A rebate of $456.15 from her health insurance company, with a letter dryly explaining that the money came courtesy of the federal health care law. It almost looked like junk mail, she said. She said she did not love the overall law, but was pleased by the unexpected windfall. Yeah. Well, are people really going to get refunds? By and large, no. Much later down in the story somewhere, the New York Times quotes a law professor as saying that very few people would be getting a check. Still, he and others say the rebate provision would prove a potent selling point for Obamacare and a well-timed tool for the Obama re-election campaign. Yeah, how about that? These insurance checks go out, these quote-unquote rebate checks go out just a couple of months before the election. No doubt. What a coincidence. What a lucky coincidence for President Obama. He and his Democratic cohorts wouldn't try to bend the law to help his re-election campaign, now would they? Oh, of course not. What the New York Times, of course, fails to report is, as a result of Obamacare, people's health care insurance premiums are going up a lot. For example, the average premium for a family hit $15,073 in 2011, according to Forbes, a publication that still actually reports on news. 1303, or a 9% higher than the year before. So you see, you pay $15,000, but hey, maybe you get $450 back. That's a pretty good deal. Don't you want that deal? It gets worse. They now cite, see, they actually do reporting. Forbes cites the chief actuary for the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, that reports that America will spend an additional $331 billion on health care in the next decade because of Obamacare. CMS estimates the growth in health insurance costs will increase 10 extra percent in 2014 because of Obamacare, a 14% increase versus a 3.5% increase. So in other words, 10% extra, more or less, added on because of the president's health care bill, because of Obamacare. In other words, if your policy costs $15,000, that's an extra $1,500 you'll pay in 1 year alone just because of the health care law. But hey, you might get $400 back. Of course, the New York Times fails to discuss the best part of the whole story of all, which is, as already reported here on YouTube, you can find the video, Obamacare gives an enormous incentive for employers to dump insurance. If you have health care insurance, as I do, as I hope you do, it is probably heavily subsidized by your employer, as mine is. But under the Obamacare law, employers have a tremendous incentive to dump insurance, and at least one study suggested between 30% and 60% or more of employers will do just that. So instead of having a big chunk of that $15,000 paid by your employer, you will get to pay all of it. Hey, that's historic. Now, doesn't that sound like a good deal to you? Well, of course, it's a terrible deal, and if the New York Times had reported all of those facts, it would be very clear. But again, you have to understand, they're not journalists, they're propagandists. They don't report the news. They are working hard to re-elect President Obama. It's a disgrace. The Obamacare law is a disgrace. These rebates trying to buy votes are a disgrace. And the fact that the full costs of the law are not going to be apparent until 2014 after the election, that's a disgrace too. This is Professor David Steinberg of the Steinberg Files.